Welcome to the first session of The Gift of Poets, a sampler, sponsored by the Broome County Arts Council's Artisan Gallery in partnership with WordPlace at the Bundy Museum. This project will highlight several poets in the coming weeks in honor of April's National Poetry Month. My name is Connie Barnes, manager of Artisan Gallery at the Broome County Arts Council, and with me is Jay Barrett Wolf, founder of WordPlace at the Bundy Museum.
Good evening.
Brian Pregast also with us to record the sessions and produce the recordings. Okay, so the first poet up is Andrei Gurianu, the author of more than a dozen books of poetry and prose. His works often explore such topics as memory and forgetting, the role of art and of the artist, and the ability of place to shape personal and collective histories. He currently teaches in the expository writing program at New York University. Welcome, Andre.
Thank you, Connie. Appreciate it. Thank you, Jay Barrett. All right. So today I'm going to read a few, some older poems, some new poems, but they're all going to be in a forthcoming book, probably fall of this year, and it's called Portraits of Time. Like the cover. It's the only copy still available right now with a lot of edits in it, but that's what I'm going to be reading for.
How about a launch?
A launch?
Yeah.
Yeah, as soon as I have copies in hand, we'll talk about it.
Okay.
So, but probably in the fall. And these are actually untitled. They're all in a series, I would say, a little bit of a preface. They're going to be quite melancholy. It's a series of sort of travel/love poems to place and to relationships, coming and going, past and present, and sort of the regret, the nostalgia, the wistfulness that comes with that. So they all sort of play nicely off one another, hopefully. And they are indeed untitled. That's the format. There's a photograph that goes along with each one of them. Bucharest in June with a bucket when everything disappears to the false bottom. If I had to choose, this one is my favorite story from the Library of Nightmares. But they are all that good. Time as the devil of love, a madman who divides long enough until there are no remainders. The heartbroken widow walking home alone with a gold chain around her neck and an empty locket because she says she's trying to forget. All of them happening in the gaps between dreams, between seasons, between how it was and how it might have been. Bucharest in June, when the eastern skies pour down as if someone threw open the deadbolt of night, as if the sky had never been made of anything else but interminable rain and the near absence of light. I keep coming back to this one because it resembles most of all the fragile infrastructure of longing. Like a carnival ride that always ends exactly where it begins, a familiar pattern of doubt one no longer questions. By the time the music stops, it's gotten so late that it's early, and we turn ugly or beautiful and tender according to each other's needs. Bucharest in June with a bucket, when I try to hold the water in my hands by making smaller buckets of skin. But the rain comes down hard, it falls through the false bottom, through the husk of myself like a second skin I've outgrown and which no longer fools anyone. I watch the water pool around my ankles and think to myself, I can't even remember what it's like not to drown. So the reference there to Bucharest is, I was born in Romania, in Bucharest specifically, so that's where that reference comes from. Next poem. The television mouths in silence something about Spain, something about farthest Russia, about God knows where. On most days I would care, but not now. I come here years later because they say the coffee is good and the people know how to dress to complement the architecture. But it's the same thing every time. Couples pair up, then walk out, holding hands And I think how stupid it is that they can't be compared to anything else but flowers or birds. They are flowers and birds. The coffee is not that good. Still, I drink my cup alone, smoke my cigarettes alone. Some days there are no words. On each table, there are empty cups and glasses with their lipstick mouths and their sweet tobacco breath, and all their stories punctuated by small rituals and habit. A sadness beyond belief, like a long, unending winter loneliness when all of the windows fog over and the ice is as thick as a palm upon the ledge. The night's cold petals wilt and disappear by morning. More flowers that come and go. Thank God that it's a hellish June. At least there are flowers everywhere, on summer dresses, on low-neck blouses, the wallpaper draped in blue ivy. From the stereo above, one love song blends into another, the notes wistful, predictably tragic. Some of us are forced to die more than once because we have no other choice. A couple next to me is making plans because they know that now is not enough. Her right hand in his left like a rope knotted in the middle, and both of them holding on with all of the force they could muster. I leave them like that. The boy who doesn't know what he has in his palm, and her painted nails just like that, her mouth just like that, and her hair and her sandals, and the heat is done for today, fini. It is bearable again. I walk out and wait by the curb, watch every bus come to the station but the one I need. What do I need? Where do I have to go now that I'm here? Inside the apartment, I throw open the window into the pitch black night and play a slow and mournful record down to the last groove. In this chair, glass in hand, each song coming to an end as if it were the last and only butterfly in bloom. I think these are prose poems, so they're written like such. I was going for a sort of story-like narrative approach with these. When enough distance and enough time has passed, all countries reach out and call to the space between, a whisper beautiful and delicate heard in your native tongue. You perch upon the branches of imagination and in a sweeping glance take in the sprawling parks with their lakes and gardens, the avenues and boulevards meandering through all of your melancholy days. And somewhere down below, there is a girl among the busy streets who'll say, without a hint of the absurd, she's read Marquez in Spanish once and knows about true love. You told me this under a mystic sky of fog and dust, on a rooftop in the middle of a city turning the soft edge of midnight. What did I care about country and time, about books and language and whether love or nostalgia can ever approximate their intimacy? All I knew is that it felt good to brush my arm against yours, eyeing the suggestion of bones, the tragedy of that low plunging line. Your voice landing in the space between us like a new obsession, one I knew could very well be killing me. Afterward, we climbed down and walked the streets for hours and years and millennia, everywhere trailed by ghosts, their chatter indiscernible as so much wind careening through the eaves. None of it made sense except the gypsy woman selling flowers in the rain, the trees reminding me of lives I'd never live. And a couple more. Nadia, my love, do you remember the years when luxury was that simple white door with a working lock and a mattress on the floor in the corner, not even worth stealing? That pair of red enamel mugs with the chipped broken lips blackened from too much scrubbing? Yes, too much scrubbing, because you said that you like washing things. I imagined that I would be dead and you will still be washing things, washing by hand even when the joints ache because, as the old saying goes, when a glass breaks at your feet, the least you can do is count it as a blessing. That shouldn't remind me of my mother just now, but it does. In the dark, by candlelight, because the power had gone out, she used to put away plates and cups and fold and refold our one set of linens. What couldn't be folded anymore, she tore in thin strips and lay out in bundles in case there was ever a need to tie something together to stop the bleeding, which she sometimes did. And one last one. This one matches the image on the cover of the girl with the camera. And here she is again, girl with the camera. Okay. So this would be, I guess, the title poem if they don't, even though they don't have titles. This would be the title poem. Okay. What saved us time and again was the way you could stitch together small moments from other people's unhappy seconds. What tricks do you still have in your bottomless bag or in the delicate folds of your blouse? As the rest were pinching collars tied around their necks, cursing the night, you would say, think of the coming snow, the quiet leading up to. And then somehow you would launch into a story about how warm a hand feels in another's hand, how it would lead you through the park, to the bridge, to the statue, to the now frozen lake, where you would turn and look back and see yourself as a little girl again, laughing hysterically when a snowflake tickled your lips. There's more to it. The story went on that road. But I often stopped listening, feeling sorry for myself. I had dipped my hand into your offering, offering nothing in return but a silence that would not ruin anything. Together we took slow, narcotic breaths that eased the pain of moving on too soon. We always move on too soon. The unknown behind us and in front of us, still saying nothing, as if carrying some delicate morsel on the tip of the tongue, savoring the myth. On those nights, in hundreds of windows, the moon cracked open and rearranged itself with each passing cloud. Thank you.
All right. I have, of course, for years admired your ability to create this beautiful combination of the matter of fact and the metaphoric, and the sort of stuff that turns my head, in the sense that it's just like, whoa, what an image, what a moment.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It means a lot.
Yeah, I've always enjoyed your work. Here's a question for you. One of the ways that we're doing this is we ask a few questions at the end of the reading of each individual poet. Do we invent the expressions? Do we create a way of communicating when we write?
I mean, I would like to think that I invent worlds when I write.
Sure.
So in a way, that world communicates, what is going on internally in here. I'm not sure necessarily that you always invent language, but you use language to invent new ways of seeing and thinking about things. And ultimately, I guess if you think about it, getting somebody to see something in a way that they hadn't seen it before,
Sure.
It could be much more powerful than simply telling them, hey, look at this, like this is what it should be, or this is how you should think about it, right? So that's where I think the invention comes from, is the shaping of imagery and worlds that convey something in such a way that somebody can say, I never thought about it that way.
Mm-hmm.
Let's go back to sort of the beginnings of things. How did you arrive at poetry as your way of expressing yourself in the world?
To be honest, I think I needed to figure out some things for myself early on, maybe in my late teens, but mostly early 20s. And most of my early work had to do with having left Romania, where I was born at a very young age, and the growing up as a bilingual, child, bilingual student, and then academic. And it was a way to try to make sense of that. And I do realize that my writing has changed significantly since then, in that I feel that I was using that work early on to make sense of things, like to think my way, right? To think my way through things. And in a sense, that limited what I was able to do. Because I sort of came back to the same things that we ruminate, right? There are things that go on in our lives and we ruminate on them, over and over. And I had to go through that phase initially to almost have it do what it was, what it was meant to do for me, and it had its function. And then afterwards, I think I moved on to the kind of poetry that that I don't know what it is until I start working on it, right? Whereas some of the other ones, I'm trying to figure out, what it means to be X, what it means to think this way, right? So there's always, there was always kind of a motive behind what I was writing early on. In a sense, I was trying to make a certain point, or I was trying to figure, X out, and that X was always very definite for me, right? Let me try to figure this thing out. Whereas I think the way that my writing, both poetry and prose, might have evolved, and I'm much more willing to let go of that, right? To try and figure things out, and maybe just let the writing go where it wants to.
There's a saying that sometimes we write to find out what we're thinking.
Yeah. So it's a lot more exploratory these days, but in such a sense that I don't impose, my will on it as much as maybe I did earlier, for it to actually function for me. Like, I don't want it to necessarily do something for me. I want the writing itself to go whichever way it will. So I serve it more than it serves me, if that makes sense.
I think that's the natural progression. If we're going to stay at this at length, we have to go from trying to make it serve us to serving the work and serving the result.
I will say that it takes longer. That's the one thing I discovered maybe the past decade, is that in the sort of the early years when I started writing, I would have, I would want to say X, or I would want to explore X topic, and I would just go and do it, because I kind of had the finish line already in mind, in a sense, right? But in this case, I could have a poem linger, for days, weeks, months. I could have a story that I start, and it just won't go anywhere for years, and then I could come back to it later. So
great. Thank you very much, Andre.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Andre. What a wonderful reading that was. Thank you. Our next poet is Elizabeth Cohen, a professor at SUNY Plattsburgh, where she teaches creative writing and English. She's the author of 6 books of poetry, most recently The Patron Saint of Cauliflower, as well as the forthcoming Wonder Electric, which will be coming out this fall. She also penned the award-winning memoir, The Family on Beartown Road, with Random House, and The Hypothetical Girl, which was a collection of short stories and published by Other Books. Welcome, Elizabeth.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, Bonnie. I love hearing Andre's poetry. I haven't heard it in a while, and I just want to start by saying it's so nostalgic for me. And, his mother often appears, and I've never been to Romania, but I feel like I have, because of all the images in his poems, and they're sort of dark and moody, and they've completely defined Romania for me. So
Romania is dark and moody. All right.
Neat.
It's great.
I don't know what it's like. I'm dying to go to Eastern Europe.
It's pretty funny. You said it's been a long time since you heard my poetry. I think it's been years since I've actually read live. I just have sort of not, especially poetry. I've actually, part of I was trying to say earlier is I started writing more prose in the past few years. And I think because of that, it's taking me into places as a writer where I hadn't been before. But I love to come back to the poems every once in a while. They do feel a lot more nostalgic. in that regard.
Yeah, yeah. I love the images, like the one of the mattress on the floor, and like there's just something kind of spare and kind of reminds me of New York City in my 20s. And, you know, there's just something I guess nostalgic is the word I would use. Yeah. So, well, okay, so I'm going to read some poems from my new book, Wonder Electric. And I guess I'll just preface this, Connie, by saying, or everybody, preface this by saying, the pandemic has been very hard for me. I've been away from my daughter. I came to California to help a friend who's sick. And I've been living in complete isolation in a canyon above Joshua Tree. So much of this poetry is two things I would say. One is I'm trying to fight back against the dark or like the depression side of it. So they're sort of humorous, I think, more than most of my work. And then some of them are very political, which is just me very much responding to these times that we're living in that are so dramatic for me. So these kind of come in a flash to me in response to this experience that we're all living through right now, which I can't seem to get away from it. Like even though I'm here so far away from everybody, it's stalking me daily. And I'm not even really reading the news that much, but I feel it. I'm sure you guys feel it too, right? So I'm going to start by reading 3 poems that are right out of the oven of this moment. And they're very imagistic poems. I'm trying to get a little bit away from narrative in my poetry. So, you know, I am a prose writer and I'm writing a novel and other things. So for me, poetry is sort of like, I want to do something else in it besides be narrative. And trying to play with sound and images and stuff. So the first one is called Synesthesia. And this is a poem written about something my daughter experiences, I do not, which is when your senses blend. So people who have synesthesia can taste smells and smell sounds and so forth. So I often felt like that was a gift that she had. I would like to do that. I would like to have that experience. So this is a poem called Synesthesia. Oh, you, wind of apple, rock of dandelion, purple breath of summer, chocolate orange of twilight, sea of forest, meadow of tide. If it smells like a song, does it bark like a flower? Does it kick like a kiss? Bow like a hug? Does it leave like an entrance, dance like cloudburst, hum like rain, rain like dirt? Oh, you, smallest chip of large, largest hunk of tiny, I'm looking for you. I've been climbing up the atoms, jumping on every moment's back, just to slide down the last shout of the lemon on your hands that were automatic weapons, that were silk. So, and that's just a poem I've just very recently written. It's not in this new book, but I just enjoyed writing it, so I thought I'd start with that. The next poem, I think, really characterizes this mood I'm in right now. Dude Where. It's called Dude Where. Is my car, my house, my husband, my dogs, 1, 2, and 3, our hamster, Pedro, and where are all the cats and the gardens fluffed with sunbeam and kale and rabbits peeping? And here's the big one, dude, where the hell are my parents and their breakfast table of newspaper and fruit? Where are all the other cars? Ford Falcon, Austin America, bright green Honda, smelling of cherry cigar and weed. And where are all the jeans, torn, patched, loved for each pocket and rip? They're all somewhere. This we can be certain of, because of the law of conservation of matter, which states things that exist will always exist. Matter cannot be created or destroyed, but it can change. So all these things are still somewhere as other things. My last car swimming is a great beluga whale, and my dogs, 1, 2, and 3, I think they might be those red-tailed hawks buzzing the lighthouse. Soon they will be the green paths I will walk on in spring on my way to becoming some other person in some other life, sewing a patch on some other beloved pair of jeans that will someday become shoes, or someone's mother who has just made a fresh pot of coffee, looking like she will be there forever, but she won't. And the next one is from this just hot out of the oven group, and then I'll read from my new book. May I have my heart back now? I was happy to loan it to you for a time, and I can tell by your red lips, your swollen mouth, that it's something you hungered for. You feasted well on my aorta, dined on my ventricles right and left, but now I'm bloodsick. The cavity where I pulled out my heart is raw and tender. A gaping sinkhole, an achy wound I've tried to fill with peaches, flower-shaped leaves, birds of paradise, with the sound of rain on glass, but somehow the wind keeps getting in with its old howl, and sand. Sand has blown in, and as you know, once the sand gets in, you never really get it out. So please return my heart, or what remains of it. I will sew it back with a porcupine quill and a few strands of my hair. I need to piece myself back. So happy I could oblige you. So those are my 3 very, very new poems. I will read some poems from my new book, which is called Wonder Electric, and it's coming out from Kelsey Books in the fall. And I won a little prize. It's like a little chapbook contest. So this is a very short book. It's 29 poems. And like I said, some of them are political. Some of them have to do with the idea of home. I'm helping my friend build a house at home. So some of them are about that. So the title poem is Wonder Electric. In the walls of the house, spirits are shuffling. Check out their power to heat water, make toast, send strips of light running into the yard, painting the dark when the tiniest deer approaches. And how the whole kitchen illuminates when you open the refrigerator door, a phosphorescent glow from that ethereal shrine, humming once an hour, protecting soup, manchego, the guacamole. Here in this republic of tamed energy, you can read by pointed ghost light. You can sew by Tiffany campfire. Each moon tug on the earth makes a tide that could heat a bath. Each breeze could blow water into steam. Soon, they say, even the axis of north and south will throw down their magnetic dice. Imagine everything backwards and upside down, and the children everywhere watching the show. So that's the title poem. Okay, I'm going to read a poem called Mowing. I have a big, big yard in Plattsburgh, New York, and so I have to mow it. Mowing. Decapitating the lilac heads of the clover, purring over a soft fold of mushroom caps, the jackhammer push over a few stray stones toward this goal, the lawn's trim locks, the way the azaleas pop, freed from fringe. Those fresh tendrils spent their whole lives waving at us. Soft dandelion froth floats away, the reverse of snow. Later, a baby crow sucked into the pool skimmer, blue-black feathers brined in chlorine, a single black eye staring up through the sprinkler rainbow. The dead want to tell us something they know. Nothing is something too, they say. When it is July and we are unemployed and sick and hungry enough to see, even nothing wants a glass of water. Even nothing can have a relapse. Even nothing needs a rest. Okay, so this is my poem about this time we are living in. I'm trying to cheer myself up a little bit, so this is called Brahms During Plague. No matter where you are, no matter what you're doing, or what the weather report or the Surgeon General have to say, there is always a celebration of violins in D major happening somewhere. A sonorous conversation between strings and bassoons, a congregation of grace notes with delicate crescendos of cymbal and bass drum, right there under the wingspan of every moment, every day, somewhere on this earth. No matter what the date, even on the anniversaries of your dead lovers and Hiroshima, tsunamis, and days your oldest relatives recall of far too much rain, there is always one muscular phrase climbing onto the back of another for a ride, day in, day out, during wars, holidays, on the birthday of your firstborn. Even on the day the last iceberg calves from what's left of Greenland or the poles, you can be assured that a single violin's voice will be rising with so much to say about how centuries can pass along hard beauty, even in difficult weather. I'm trying hard to make something good out of all this. Okay. I'm trying to think of what kind of poem to read to you that's not too sad or depressing. Okay. This poem is called Dogs Can Smell Darkness. In the 4th grade, our teacher told us dogs could smell darkness and furthermore cancer, and that hospitals sometimes bring them in to help spot illness early on. It was remarkable to think those same animals that begged for scraps and made chaos of the trash at the skate park had such abilities. At home, our dogs dug a hole behind our father's rose garden so deep, he said, we could peer down and see Antarctica. We used to listen to them howl when the other dogs howled in other people's yards far away, thinking maybe they were telling each other how to do it, or describing what darkness smells like, or furthermore, light. This poem is also from this new book, Wonder Electric. It's called Imprints. These are the places we lay on the sand. You can still see us side by side, the little wrinkles in our clothing, the place your sneaker dug, making a trough. We have left behind the impressions of our feet, both coming and departing, each one a small boat floating on a sand sea, each one leaving somewhere and arriving somewhere else further out. There are so many other places we have left evidence. You could make a whole compendium of our snow angels, sleek runs and turns down mountains. The cross-hatched remains are snowshoes stamped on mountainsides. And the place, of course, where you are buried now, that mounded spot with its rough, sloping granite stone, and the place beside it, waiting for me. The world is printed with us, summer to spring. We have left ourselves everywhere. Our love litters the planet, even blows like escaped plastic bags, moving over avenues into deserts and northern forests, where they'll catch sometimes on the trees. I guess I'll just read one more. I feel like reading I have 2 short poems about my mother, which I suddenly feel like reading because when I think of Binghamton, I think about taking care of my mother, which I did there until she died. So I shall read these 2 poems about her. They're kind of sad, but I'm gonna read them. All right. The Watch. This is the last of my mother's many gold-plated watches, a Timex, the sort you wind up with an elastic band that might catch on the small hairs of your arm, an experience that provokes a twinge, something not quite pain, but certainly not pleasant, not so unlike the feeling in your chest each time you see this watch, still sitting on the bathroom shelf all these years later, as if the ghost of her might be wondering what time it is, or as if she might step out of the shower or wake from a nap and think, where's my watch? Where's my daughter? Where's my life? And I'll just end with this super sad poem, but it seems like a good one to end on. You guys know the New York State Veterans Home in Oxford, right? This is about that place. The waiting. Sitting by a window, peering from the heavy bone sockets of her eyes. This is my mother in her last days, living on nibbled lamb and grapefruit juice, feeding the last bits of summer to a single bird, waiting for my father down the hall in a separate unit of the New York State's Veterans Home to come out and greet her, which he never does. I'll stop there.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks you guys for including me.
Wonderful range
Fabulous.
of discussion there.
Mhm.
All sorts of imagery. I would ask you, how does your life experience create this person who's writing these pieces now?
Yeah, that's a good one. Obviously, I'm very stalked from the deaths of my parents. I took care of them for almost 7 years, 5 in my house and 2 in nursing homes near my house. And I can't really get away from it. I want to. I feel like I should just like pack it away, put it on a shelf, but it follows me. And those images just kind of stalk me. They're very ghosty around me. So that's the reason for those last 2 poems.
Mhm.
But here you are now at Joshua Tree. You're out on the other side of, literally on the other side of the country.
Far, yeah. I think that's why I wanted to come here. I'm like running away from the East for my life.
Hmm.
Yeah,
The geographic cure.
yeah. I'll let you know if it works.
It may be palliative more than a curative.
I think so, yeah. It's just so different. Everything about it's so different. The light, the smells, the little lizards all over. It's just so different.
Yeah.
I don't know, are you a regular reader or performer of your work? Are you out that much?
I have been. I teach. I'm a college professor, so
Right.
I'm on a program. Often asked to participate in like student readings, and I live near Vermont, and there's a lot of poets in Vermont. It's just a poety place, especially like Burlington. So all these poets are always saying like, oh, and then there's that Elizabeth Cohen, she lives on the other side of the lake, you know, so it's like Champlain. So I get invited to read with like Karen McCadden and just all these groovy poets over there. So I do some reading. I'm trying to slow down more because I know that I can kind of rip. But you know, it's a practiced thing. You got to teach yourself how to do it.
Mhm.
Yeah,
You find a difference
sure.
between a regular reading, let's say, you know, a sort of classical poetry reading, and the more performative based events that are happening around the country, around the world now?
Yes, I do. I teach spoken word. So I'm teaching kids from the Bronx and Queens and Brooklyn, and you know, they want to be spoken word poets. They want to be in slams.
Sure.
They're very performative, and that's been very good for me because my poems really do live on pages in books that are shut, and that's a different kind of thing. You know, like their poems,
Mhm.
they really wouldn't care if they never were on paper. Like they could just be like spoken all the time. And so yeah, I do see there's like this huge performance kind of poetry happening now. And like, where do I fall on that continuum? More towards the book side, you know, I'm not so much dramaturgical, but I do think there's an element of drama in the way that I perform that just comes from doing this for so very long.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Thank you guys.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you. Look, our final poet this evening is Dante DeStefano. He is an author of Ill Angels from Etruscan Press and Love is a Stone Endlessly in Flight by Bright Horse Books. His poetry, essays, and reviews have appeared in the American Academy of Poets Poem a Day, the Best American Poetry 2018, the Prairie Schooner, the Sewanee Review, and elsewhere. He co-edited the anthology Misrepresented People, Poetic Responses to Trump's America in 2018. He holds a PhD in English literature from Binghamton University and is the poetry editor for The Dialogist. Welcome, Dante.
Thank you, Connie. Thank you, Jay Barrett. I'm really happy to be here, and thank the Broome County Arts Council and the Bundy Museum and the radio station this is going to be on. And I'm really excited to be reading with Andre and Elizabeth. I've read both of their work before, and I remember when Andre was the poet laureate of Broome County, I think.
Yep, that's right.
A long time ago. And I remember buying his book in Barnes and Nobles, maybe, I don't know, 15 years ago or something.
That's a throwback.
I think it was published by Main Street Rag, maybe. Is that right?
One of them was by Main Street. I don't remember which one you picked up at Barnes and Noble.
Yeah, I think it was front Porch View or Front Porch.
Yes, that's correct. I was still working at Barnes and Noble at that time, so I was kind of hopping back and forth in the register and the reading area.
And I really enjoyed that book. That was one of the many books that I had, and you know, as I'm sure Andre and Elizabeth and Jay Barrett also do, I'm constantly getting books and giving them away. So that is in the hands of some student someplace. Who knows? Maybe it's, you know, been through a couple of different hands over the years, but I really enjoyed hearing your poems and, you know, your deadbolts of night and flowers that come and go, and that line, I am a suggestion of bone. That was beautiful. And I love the project of that new book of yours, that ekphrastic kind of project with photography and prose poetry. I think I'm going to definitely check that out. That sounds amazing. And
yeah, you picked up on the ekphrastic nature, but it's actually done with a local photographer. He goes by the name of Technari, it says it here, and he's a local artist. Sometimes you might see his work at like First Fridays if he's still in the area. He has his gallery at 33 Court Street. So I love working with him, and we collaborate quite a bit, his photography and my writing. So yeah, love playing off of that.
did that project unfold as a dialogue between the two of you, like in the moment? Or?
It started initially while we were traveling actually through Europe. And I realized that he shoots only in black and white. So talk about like darkness, you know, Elizabeth, there's definitely lots of darkness in these poems. In these images, like, let me just show you one real quick. So he uses handmade film. He makes his own film, and there's always like something a little bit off. Like here's an example of one. This where it looks like it's all burnt. That's just the way that particular slide, basically that little piece of film was not perfectly I guess lined up on the roll, and essentially you're taking a chance of shooting that film. You never know what's going to come out. Sometimes there's some beautiful random splotches that might actually add to the image, or sometimes it destroys it altogether. You just never know. So I kind of like that concept of, you know, leaving it up to chance, and sort of the darkness, because of the homemade black and white film, just felt they really went along with sort of what I was writing at the time. So that's how that collaboration started. But yeah, I love working with other artists, especially visual artists. You know, Elizabeth, you're saying, you know, your more recent poems are super imagistic, and I totally agree with that. You know, they are. And I was telling, I believe before you came on, you know, Jay Barrett, I said, you know, that's all about, my poetry is sort of all about creating imagery, right? Like creating worlds, right? And I think that that's kind of what my work here does, in this book does. The combination of the suggestion of the images with the suggestion of the language sort of creates a world that you can inhabit. And I was totally feeling that when Elizabeth was writing, was reading, is that you could act, even though you said that they weren't necessarily narrative, there were images that were stitched together, right? And like the images stitched together form a narrative in and of themselves that you can inhabit. So I love that aspect of it. But you know what? We should probably listen to Dante read, because that's how we started this. So
And I wanted to also say to Elizabeth that I met you. I don't know if we actually met.
Remember you?
I saw you read with Bill Stratton at the Broome County Arts Council.
That's it, yeah.
It was the second poetry reading my daughter ever went to. I think she was like 1.
Yeah.
And I bought a copy of The Patron Saint of Cauliflower and have enjoyed it quite a bit. And I loved hearing your poems today. It was really interesting contrast with Andre's vibrant and motley bouquets. They were kind of, in a way. And I loved like the synesthesia poem. I felt like there was kind of a synesthesia in all of the poems. And I love some of those phrases, like the wind of apples, beautiful way to start that poem. And all of the different things in the poems, like the beluga whales, the red tail hawks, just really evocative and incredibly beautiful to hear. And even this, the sad poems were beautiful too. So thank you for giving me all these poems tonight. I'm really enjoying listening to them. So now I'll give you a few of mine.
Yes.
And I thought to continue kind of with Andre's project, I have a couple of poems that I did in dialogue with local artists. So I was going to read a few of those to start. And they're part of an exhibit that my wife has curated at the Tioga Arts Council. So these artists also do things in Broome County. So some people that see this or hear this may want to check out their work. And the first artist is named Michael Husted, and he is a visual artist. He's also a jeweler and a sculptor. And the piece that I did a poem in dialogue was a sculpture made from reclaimed barn beam that was made to look like a pillar of stacked stones. And I can show you kind of, you won't be able to see,
wow, yeah.
but you can see kind of what it looks like, a photograph of it. Those of you on the radio won't be able to see that, but it's a pillar of stacked stones made out of wood. And so that piece is called El Dorado, and I wrote a poem also called El Dorado after Michael Husted. El Dorado. Sometimes a column of stacked stones is not a column of stones, but a single stone sculpted to resemble many. And thinking about that might tell you something about the dance of atoms in an artist's hand as she drips umber on a taut canvas. And you might think of how all art tends to gesture toward dust motes uncertainly dappling the sunlight falling on teacups and hardwood floors in a memory you can't quite pin down. Like a butterfly, a lepidopterist has immobilized or immortalized or simply studied, but in any case has pierced. And of course, moments are like that, and a pond, and green hills, and the tall grass bowing down to wildflowers that rise up in sudden tiny Augusts all their own. And something I can't quite say about time, and holding on to a handful of sod, a lump of grief sung into the landscape from an open door. And the next poem is also in dialogue with an incredible local artist from Montrose. Her name is Amy Zhao, and she does these canvases that are kind of like if, Chagall was, more abstract, kind of like that phase in Chagall where he's moving from like a little bit of like kind of Cubist influence to his mature style. Like I think of the painting, The Poet at 3 a.m., which I think is in the Philadelphia Art Museum. But anyway, this is the image. You can't really get a good sense of it. Those of you who are at home, it has many blues in it, and it looks like kind of like a photograph of the Earth from outer space, or something that is beneath the sea. So this is based on Amy Zhao's painting Sparkle Night, and my poem is called Nocturne. Nocturne. The night is a boat our daughter sleeps in, a hammock slung between blue hours, the gallop of a rocking horse in the reverie of hospital hallway and midnight moon. Each evening, I see a star I cannot name out the window. I say to it, the night is the flipper of a humpback whale. You are a bright eyeful of anemone, a pearl in a coral bouquet, a gill sprouting from the side of my neck as waves cascade above my head, and I become more Pacific, maritime, indigo. I put my ear to a broken seashell, and I can hear it singing this refrain. The night is an ear pressed to a shard. You are a night, a curve, a frigate burning on the roiling sheet of the vast, dark deep. A bird atop the mast whistles twilight, which is to say, the lullabies in you, rock, paper, scissor, and then ricochet. So those two poems for local artists, again, their names are Amy Zhao and Michael Husted. If support their work. Also, don't forget to support the work of the Broome County Arts Council and the Tioga Arts Council, and any other local arts councils within driving distance. I'm going to read a poem from my second book, which is called Ill Angels. It's by Etruscan Press. Speaking of Chagall, there's a Chagall painting on the cover. And I decided to read this poem because of the shootings in Atlanta and Boulder recently. And I think this poem was written after the Pulse nightclub shooting, but it could have been written, it could have been written at any time. So unfortunately. So brief instructions for drawing a portrait of my wife after the most violent week in recent US history. Begin with the intangibles. Her voice, composed from cradle song and carry on. Her kindness, a doe on the median. Her concern, a heavy kiss, a deep breath. Continue by cross-hatching the background, stars in the shape of fractured orbital sockets, anger shaped like a bruise, bruises shaped like protest, protest shaped like verdict. Figure out how to draw an indictment in the burgeoning tremble of her frown. Do not cordon off the lines of her face with police tape and render her in chalk. Do not forget that grief digs a grave in the wind, unchains a pit bull in your throat, leaves the imprint of a fist, a baton, an instep flowering downward in rage. Erase the Kevlar vest you hastily sketched to protect her lovely clavicle. You cannot protect her. Instead, outline the frenzied lion's mane of her brown hair. Trace the defiant contours of her neck. Detail every inch of her body as it has pressed against your own body, fused anew as one unbroken body. Delineate her against a darkness stippled with gunshots. Call it perspective because you believe in angels and love more than in grand juries and arraignments. You will not draw those things, but you know now that you must spend your entire life drafting the halftones and patterns this darling bride twirls above you in the endless night sky. One other poem from this book. It's the first poem in the book, and it is a poem called Reading Dostoyevsky at 17. And when I was in high school, and really one of the formative experiences in all of my education was reading the great novels of Dostoyevsky, Crime and Punishment, The Brothers Karamazov, The Possessed, The Idiot. You know, those novels shaped me in fundamental ways. And this poem, you don't need to have read Dostoyevsky or to have read him recently to get the to get what's going on here, because this is also a dramatization of what it's like to be 17, I think. And I spend my days, I'm a high school English teacher, so I've been doing that for the past 15 years at Union Endicott High School. So I've had a lot of time to observe teenagers. So reading Dostoyevsky, oh, and I should say one other thing. Dmitry Karamazov is one of the technically four brothers Karamazov. One of them is an illegitimate son, and the other three, Dmitry, Ivan, and Alyosha, are the main protagonists of the novel. And Dmitry Karamazov is kind of, there's a lot of things to say about his character, but one thing you can really say about him is that he's somebody who is kind of trying to learn how to love in the way that we all try to learn how to love when we are teenagers. And sometimes that can be a lifelong process too. But all right, so reading Dostoyevsky at 17. In those days, my dreams always changed titles before they were finished. And I wanted only to love in that insane, tortured way of poor, dear Dmitry Karamazov. Suddenly, I was speaking the language of lapdog and samovar. This is the ballroom, the barracks, the firing squad. This is the old monk with the beard of bees. This is the orange lullaby the moon of the moon will sing you when it's grieving. This is the province you escape by train, fleeing heavy snow and eternal elk. This is the part where I take your hand in my hand and I tell you, we are burning. And the last poem I'll read is from my first book, Love is a Stone Endlessly in Flight. And it's really the first poem that I ever wrote. I mean, I had been writing poems for about 10 years, but it's the first poem I wrote. And it is called The Orchard Keeper. And it's about my father, the orchard keeper. My father wanted to be an apple orchard. To this end, he spent 30 years tortured by the hum of letter sorting machines, which shuffled neither rain, nor sleet, nor snow, nor hail, until his face assumed the sheen of a red delicious whose sorrow the worm only knows.
That was amazing. Dante, thank you very much. I wanted to ask you, you sort of followed suit with Andre in starting off with some ekphrastic poems. And I'm wondering, having been writing for a long time, it seemed to me that the idea of ekphrastic poetry sort of appeared about 10 years ago. And that is just the impression I had, but I'm outside of the academic world. So I was going to ask you to say a little bit about what exactly that means.
Sure. Ekphrasis is very old in Western culture. I mean, the first example of ekphrasis that a lot of people point to is the description of Achilles' shield in the Iliad. But, you know, throughout the ages, there's always been, in different cultures around the world, and in, you know, in Western culture in particular, this dialogue between art and visual arts and poetry. If you think more recently about some poets that are important in the 20th century, I mean, in the 21st century, like if you look at like the New York School poets in the United States, I mean, the New York School is a school of art. It's Jackson Pollock, it's Larry Rivers, it's a whole bunch of other artists.
Sure.
Then it's also John Ashbery, the poet, it's Frank O'Hara, it's Kenneth Koch, and a whole bunch of other people who are second or third generation, you know, New York School poets. And that, you know, they were always drawing inspiration from the visual arts and from jazz music and from, you know, cosmopolitan life in New York City. If you go other places around the world, you know, think about the friendship between Federico Garcia Lorca, Salvador Dali, and Luis Buñuel. You know, you have three artists of the highest caliber: a poet, playwright in Lorca, a filmmaker in Buñuel, and a painter, a visual artist and provocateur in Dali. So, you know, it's kind of an ingrained, you know, feature of poetry, that it will always be speaking to other arts. Because if you think about what poetry is, it's always a form of dialogue with the past. You know, the Bloom notion of, you know, the misprisioning, right? What we do when we write a poem is to creatively misread poems that came before it, you know. So we're always talking to other arts, to you know, to other poets across time, and also to each other in the present day.
Sure. But
I do think that you know, there has been a lot. If you see like community arts organizations and, you know, workshops and things like that in high schools and middle schools and elementary schools, using ekphrastic art quite a bit now. I
see contests for it.
A way to teach poetry in the arts. So.
I teach it too. I teach ekphrastic art. Bruegel painted a painting called The Fall of Icarus. And you may know that painting because it's this beautiful big landscape, but like there's this one tiny little detail in the background of the painting, and it's Icarus falling, because you know the story of Icarus is he had wax wings and he flew too close to the sun. And Bruegel was a 17th century. Carlos Williams wrote poems in response to that painting. William Carlos Williams is called Landscape with the Fall of Icarus, and Auden's is called Musée des Beaux-Arts. So I always reference those poems. There's also been a lot of other poems about the Fall of Icarus painting. So it's kind of like a tradition. But I think that ekphrastic art poetry is well, you know, cemented into like the canon. And now it's like very popular because it's something you can do with third graders, you know, like you'll be like, here's a painting. What do you think? Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that's where it arced into a sort of the more mainstream view, using that term, because certainly 25 years ago when I was writing, I had never heard the word. You know, the fact, yes, I get that this as a process has gone on for centuries, but it wasn't a popular sort of in the popular culture.
Yeah.
I think a technological shift played a role in that as well, right? We're an image-driven society. Images are everywhere and around us. So it's actually much, it's easier to combine image and word. You can do it, using Instagram, right? Like there's Instagram poets out there,
Right.
and you have image, words, and they're already on the screen. Where maybe 25 years ago, without that easy access, it wasn't necessarily part of, the mainstream, or it wasn't talked about as often, but it's always been there, as Dante pointed out, Elizabeth pointed out. It has a long history, but sort of our technology has caught up to the point where it can become more mainstream and more easily accessible.
Yeah, it's become more salient now, and it's easily accessed with a handful of people writing poems on their phone, which is simply a little house full of images.
It's workshop friendly.
Yes.
I have something I want to ask Dante about
Sure.
one of his poems. Gosh, now I can't remember the name of the poem though. It was a beautiful poem, and one of the images was her kindness like a doe on the median. Is that correct, Dante?
A doe.
That's like a love poem, right?
That's the poem from my wife. Yeah.
So first of all, I love the last poem of your father as an apple orchard. I just have to get that out there. That is the most amazing poem. And are you friends with Bill Stratton? Because that really reminds me of his father poem.
We had this incredible class in Binghamton University as undergraduates. It was me, Bill Stratton, Nicole Santalucia, Leah Umansky, and a couple other people who haven't gone on to poetry, but all of those people went on to do, great. So.
Yeah, that poem, that apple orchard poem, really reminds me a lot of his poems about his father too, that are not, that's just so amazing. That poem's amazing. But the other poem, the one about your wife, all the images in it really snap and they don't make sense. So it's so arresting. Like, I don't think of a doe on the median as kindness. I think of it as like, oh my God, what will happen? So that makes me think that her kindness has the fragility, or, it's really a wonderful use of imagery to make something more complicated than it is.
Yeah, well, I think that poem, that's great that you like that poem. For me, is about the feeling that you have when these things happen in our culture. For a lot of people in the United States, a lot of life is relatively safe, but and that's at the expense of other people for whom obviously life is not safe, right? But when something happens like the shootings in Atlanta or Boulder, you start to think about your loved ones and the American obsession with violence and our gun culture, which is out of control. And there is that feeling of fragility at the center of that poem, that all of this, if we go back to your William Carlos Williams, the pure products of America go crazy all around us all the time, right? And scary, so.
Yeah. Well, thank you so very much for your readings. This is everything that I hoped for, everything that I'm sure Barrett hoped for. This was absolutely fabulous. Thank you for sharing your gift of poetry. Next week, we'll hear from poets Wendy Stewart, Nicole Santalucia, Michael Folds, and Joshua Lindenbaum.
Thank you all very much. Much appreciated. I appreciate your answering my questions. We'll have more questions next time and more questions when you come back. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Take care of yourselves.